So today's video, I'm showing you how to sew a lovely dress. So this is going to be a super beginner, kind of intermediate project. I think it's well suited for a beginner because I do go through it step by step by step, hence kind of a long video. So if you just follow along, you should be able to make it if it's your first project. So I used 2 meters of a cotton linen blend, so it's kind of a nice sturdy fabric to sew with, but it still has a good drape to it. So that's like my favorite fabric to sew with. And then you'll also need a little bit of elastic as well, just to wrap around your arm for the puffed sleeve. I used, I think, like a 1/4 inch or 1/2 centimeter, just something that's fairly thin. And then yeah, I think that's it. Oh, also a boxy fitting t-shirt. So not too loose, but definitely not like a tight fitting women's cut because we will not be sewing in darts. So this is what mine looks like. So as you can see, it's fairly loose. It's like not fitted at all. No darts or anything. And we're gonna start with something like this to create our base pattern and then build off from there to like create the dress itself. Please let me know if you make this project, or if you have any questions at all, just drop them down below and I will do my best to get back to you and answer your question. I hope you enjoy the video and try this out for yourself, and I'll stop talking so you can watch the video. Okay, thanks. So I'm starting off with my blank piece of paper. You can use craft paper, newspaper, whatever you have. Grab a t-shirt that you like the fit of. So you want to make sure it's a looser fitting, straight cut t-shirt. So not super oversized, but you don't want it to be a tight cut because we are not adding darts. So lay your shirt down and fold it in half as cleanly as possible with the back sides touching. So you're going to draw a straight line down the center front and then trace around the edge of the front neckline, along the top of the shoulder, and then down the armhole seams. So for the armholes, I like to use my fingernail, as you can see here, to kind of guide along the seam where the sleeve connects with the body of the shirt. And then I'll use my pencil to connect to where my nail is and mark a line. And then from there, I just connect the dots to make kind of a smooth line. Then trace down the sides of the shirt and across the bottom, cutting it off at the length you would like the top of the dress to end. So for me, this was about 14 inches from the top of my shoulder down to the hem or the waistline, which lands just above the bottom of my rib cage. So kind of in between like a princess seam and my normal waist. Next, I am drawing in my seam allowances, and I prefer to use a 1/2 inch. So I'm marking that down the center front, along the shoulder, the armhole, the sides, and the bottom edge of the shirt. And just note that I didn't add any seam allowance around the neckline because my t-shirt was already a crew neck fit and I didn't want my dress to have such a high neckline. So I just I'm going to cut out exactly along the neckline rather than adding a seam allowance. And then you are going to cut 2 of these pieces out of your fabric. That should say front, not center. I don't know why I wrote center, but that is our front piece. Then I'm repeating the same process for the back of the t-shirt. So I'm folding it with the front sides together this time, tracing along the center back, the neckline edge, the top of my shoulder, and down the armhole, and down the side as well. And here I'm just making sure that the back length matches the front, so they are both going to be 14 inches from the shoulder down to the hemline. Now for the seam allowances, skip adding seam allowances to the center back as well as the neckline, but go ahead and add them everywhere else. So along the shoulder, the armhole, the side, and down the bottom. And you are going to need 2 of these back pieces as well. Then go ahead and cut out your front and back pattern pieces. Onto the sleeve, I'm repeating that same tracing process that we did for the front and back. So I'm laying the shirt sleeve down flat, tracing down the top of the shoulder, the bottom edge, and the underside of the sleeve, and repeating that same process where I connect my pencil to my fingers to trace around the upper sleeve edge, or where the armhole connects. Then you can flip the shirt over, line up the top of the shoulder to that same center line, or the top of the sleeve, I guess, and trace the back of the sleeve shape this time. And I am marking which side is front and back here, but it won't really matter in the end. Next, I'm going to extend the sleeve down by 3 inches, so it's 10 inches total from center top down to the bottom. Then mark a straight line across and connect a straight line from each side corner down to meet that line. Now I'm just marking around the entire sleeve with Sharpie to make it easier to see, and I'm going to cut out this shape. So this is our basic sleeve block, and we're going to continue modifying it to get the puffed sleeve look. So once you've cut out your sleeve, mark a straight line down the center front, and then I marked out from that line by 1.5 inches on either side, connecting those points to draw another 2 lines, and then repeating that. So extending 1.5 inches each time outward until you have 7 lines in total. Then grab a fresh piece of paper and, starting with the center line and moving down one side, cut down each line, and then using a small piece of tape, separate each of those paper strips by another 1.5 inches and securing them down. So make sure the bottom edges stay lined up as you go, just to make sure our sleeve is staying straight. Then at the top center of the sleeve there, I marked upwards by 1.5 inches. On the bottom of the sleeve, I marked downward by 1.5 inches from the center point. Then on each side of the sleeve, I'm marking inwards by 2 inches. Now start at the top center mark and draw a sloping line downwards to meet the side mark we just made, and repeat that on the other side, and same for the bottom. So starting at the bottom center, curve slightly upwards to meet up with the side points. So we are basically extending the top and the bottom of the sleeve here to achieve the puff we are looking for in the sleeves. What you could do is retrace this so that you have like a cleaner sleeve without all of these kind of, pieces on them, but I just think it's fine to leave it like this. I know I need 2 of these sleeves, 1 for each side, and I'm just going to add a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around the edge because we still need that seam allowance in there. And I personally love huge, voluminous sleeves. Like, I want this dress to have dramatic sleeves. If you didn't want sleeves this big, you could cut out that last gap we did right there, and just have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gaps in between the spaces, or you could separate it by like 1 inch instead of 1.5 inches. You essentially would just be making this, but a little bit smaller, a little bit narrower, so that the sleeves wouldn't be as big and voluminous. But I like a big sleeve, so that's what we're going for. And lastly, I am just tracing around those seam allowances with Sharpie and then cutting out my sleeve pattern. Next, I'm going to measure the bottom part of my dress. So I'm taking another piece of paper, grabbing one of my top pieces, and I want to make sure this measures twice what my top is. Then I'm going to extend that down by 16 inches for me, which was from where my shirt stopped to around mid-thigh. And don't forget to add seam allowances to the bottom and down the side. This side is cut on the fold ×2. So then when you open it up, it will be a long piece that we're going to gather to attach to the top. I also wanted to add a bottom tier to my skirt, so I took out a piece of paper that was slightly longer than the top tier of the dress, and I drew another rectangle that was 5 inches deep and 3 inches longer than the width of the top tier, and then I added my seam allowance to that. So as you can see, it's just a little bit longer than the top tier, and this as well needs to be cut on the fold. So now we have the bottom of the dress, the very bottom tier, the back piece, the front piece, and the sleeve piece, and we are ready to begin cutting out our fabric. You can see here, I just have it folded over so that it's doubled. Then I'm going to line up my pieces parallel to the selvage edge. So I'm imagining if I had a grain line here in my pattern, it would be parallel to this finished edge. When you buy fabric from the fabric store, you'll notice that there is a raw edge that they cut, and then there is the finished edge, which is like, can be a different color, or it's slightly more tightly woven. And so that is called the selvage. So whenever there's a pattern, say you buy a store-bought pattern, there will be a grain line, and that should be parallel generally to the lengthwise grain. Now the back, the center, and I'm going to pin them down, but you can also just use weights. Then I cut out the back and front pieces. And please don't mind my switch here from voiceover to real talking. Sometimes I felt like talking and sometimes I didn't. So here I'm just cutting out my sleeve. And since my sleeve is just barely fitting on my pattern here, I am going to be cutting into the selvage edge. Generally you wouldn't want to do that, but it'll be within my seam allowance, so it's fine. I'm fine with it. Next I'm cutting out the top tier of the bottom of the dress. Make sure this is cut on the fold again, and I am cutting out 2 of these pieces. So since it's already cut on the fold, you'll actually need to cut it out twice from your fabric, as I did there, and then repeat that with the very bottom tier. And I've just realized that I forgot to add seam allowance to the top of this tier. But I think it will work out anyway once we sew it all together. The tier just won't be as long, but if you want to add a 1/2 inch seam allowance to yours, then I would highly recommend. Okay, so after cutting this out and really seeing how long the bottom of the dress is, I've decided that it's going to be a bit more gathered at the waist than I would like. It's a little bit too flouncy. So I'm going to just take 5 inches off of this top tier here. And then save this extra bit for later because we will need it to make our straps. And then now for this very bottom tier, I'm also going to be taking about 3 inches off the edges as well. All right, so now you should have 2 back pieces, 2 front pieces, 2 sleeve pieces, 2 bottom tiers, 2 for the bottom of the dress. So on to sewing. I'm starting with my 2 center pieces, laying them right sides together and sewing a straight stitch along the center front edge. Then you can press that open so it's nice and clean. I really like the detailing of the line down the center front. I think it adds a nice design, but if you'd rather not have it, you could simply cut 1 center piece on the fold and skip the step of sewing the 2 pieces together. Now taking your back pieces, flip the right sides down, and we're going to create a clean back edge that we'll eventually add ties to. So start by folding in the edge by around 1/4 inch, iron that in place, and then fold in again by another 1/4 inch, as you can see there. So repeat that on both sides and pin in place. Then you're going to sew a straight line very close to the inside edge to get that clean finish, as you can see here. Then grab your front piece and lay your back pieces on top, making sure right sides are together. Then pin and sew along both shoulder seams and down underneath the arms on either side, and press your seams open as you go just to keep things clean and tidy. Now onto the neckline. I'm using the exact same finish as we did for the back edges, but it's slightly more finicky because it's on the curve. So basically fold in your neckline edge by around 1/4 inch, iron that down, and then fold it in again by another around 1/4 inch. Then sew close to the inside edge of that fold all the way around the neckline, and make sure to iron everything down afterwards to fix any warping or stretching that might have occurred while you were sewing it down. Then I'm going to take my 2 sleeve pieces, starting a few inches in. I'm going to put a pin just to mark it. I'm going to measure that same distance on the other side. And I'm going to sew a straight stitch all along the top seam with a wide stitch length, making sure not to backstitch so that I can pull it and we'll gather it all along. Once you have that straight stitch sewn with the loose threads on either side, you can fold the sleeve in half with the right sides together and pin and sew down the side seam. Repeat this on both sleeves, and when you're sewing down the side seam, don't forget to switch your stitch length back to its normal setting. I always forget to do this. Then grab one sleeve, and on one side of the straight stitch we did around the top, grab those threads and tie them together into a double knot so that they won't come undone. Then follow the stitching to the other side and take that top thread, leaving the bottom one, and gently pull the top thread along to create gathers in the fabric, easing the fabric along with your fingertips along the thread and continuing to gather all the way around the top of the sleeve. Then grab the top of the dress we were sewing on earlier and measure the circumference around the armhole. So this is going to be the measurement you want the top of your sleeve to be. So mine was 18 inches, so I measured around the whole top of the sleeve, as you can see here, either gathering it more if I needed it to be shorter, or releasing some of the gathering if it needed to be longer. So the goal is to make these measurements the same so that the sleeve will fit snugly into the armhole. Once the measurement is the same as the sleeve opening, you can take the two threads you've been pulling on and tie those into a double knot to secure all of that gathering in place. Then use your fingers to spread the gathers as evenly as possible and repeat that with the second sleeve. To attach the sleeves to the main body, make sure the bodice piece is still turned right sides in and turn your sleeves right sides out. Next, you're going to slide one of the sleeves into the armhole, aligning the sleeve edge on the inside to the armhole edge on the outside. So right sides will be facing each other, and we're going to match up the side seams as I'm doing here. So place one pin at the bottom of the armhole and then stretch across to the top and place a second pin at that top of the shoulder mark. Then from there, pin all around the circumference of the opening, arranging the gathers as you go to make them as evenly as possible. Then repeat the same thing for the other sleeve and sew around the armhole edge. Then, with the top of the dress still turned wrong sides out, we can focus in on the bottom part of the sleeve. So starting around the bottom edge, fold upwards by around 1/4 inch, iron that down, and then fold upwards again by around 1 centimeter this time. Essentially, you just want the fold to be big enough to fit your elastic, so I'm just measuring that there. Then I'm going to pin down all the way around my sleeve and sew a straight line close to the inside edge of that fold, leaving the main space open for the elastic to fit through. And make sure to leave a small opening so that we can thread the elastic into the channel we've just created. So to get the length of elastic you need, measure your elastic around your arm just above your elbow. Then add a few inches to that length so it's fairly loose to be able to go up and down your arm, and then that is the length you're going to need, and you'll just cut that out twice for both sleeves. So this is for a looser fitting sleeve, but if you would like the elastic to fit snugly to your arm and also have a bit more volume around the bottom of your sleeve, then you can measure the exact circumference of your arm without adding any extra length. Then take your elastic and hook a safety pin onto one side, which is going to act as a bit of a guide to inserting the elastic. So insert the pin through the opening we left, and using your fingers, just guide the elastic through that channel. And make sure to place a pin on the other side of the elastic as well, so it doesn't get lost inside the channel. Then, when you've made it all the way around the sleeve edge, pull the elastic through and connect the two ends of the elastic, sewing straight across where they join. Once the elastic loop has been stitched closed, pull on the gathers and ease the elastic back into the channel and stitch across the opening. Then your sleeve is complete. Now we will make the ties for the back of the dress. So take your remaining fabric and measure a rectangle that is around 13 inches long. Then cut 6 strips approximately 1 inch wide each. Then for each of those strips, you're going to fold them in half lengthwise and iron to create a crease. Then open up that fold and then sandwich in both sides to meet at the middle, and then fold again down that middle crease to close both of the sides in. It sounds a little bit confusing, but hopefully you can just see what I'm doing here. Then you can sew a straight line close to the very edge, folding in the end of one side to create a clean finish and leaving the other end raw. Then I am laying down the top of the dress right sides outward, and along the back opening I'm going to pin my ties down. So there will be a tie placed at the top one about an inch up from the bottom, and then measure the distance in between that top and bottom point and place another tie in the middle. Then repeat that same thing on the other side of the back. Then to secure the ties, you can sew across the end following that same stitch line that is already there, just to keep everything very clean, as you can see here. And that completes the top of our dress, so we can move on to the bottom now. So grab your larger bottom tier and pin and sew a straight line down both of these sides. Then grab your very bottom smaller tier and do the exact same thing. So just pinning and sewing down the sides to create essentially a large loop. Now back to the top tier, we are going to do a similar gathering technique as the sleeves. So sew a straight line all the way around the top circumference of the tier using a wide stitch length, making sure not to backspace. And then as you can see here, we have the front and the back threads hanging loose at the beginning and the end. So on one side, I'm going to take those two threads and tie a double knot. Then on the other, take only the top thread and start pulling on it to gather the fabric all the way around the edge, using your fingers to help distribute the gathers as you pull on the thread. Make sure not to pull the threads too tightly or too hard, or it may snap and you will have to start from the top again, which is very annoying. Once you've gathered around the skirt a fair amount, grab the top of the dress and measure along the very bottom edge. And that, again, is the circumference measurement you're trying to create for the bottom. So you may need to take out some gathers or gather a little bit more. Just keep on going until you reach the correct length. Once their lengths are equal, then you can tie a double knot on the threads you are pulling and distribute the gathers as evenly as you can around the top of the skirt. Then fold the bottom skirt in half so that the seams are at either side, and then fold it in half again so you have the exact center front and back. Then place a pin on all four corners so that there is equal distance in between them. So on either side, and then the center front point and the center back point. Now take the top of your dress, right sides out, and place it literally inside the skirt, as you can see here. So right sides should be facing towards each other. Then pin the center front of your top to the center front point on the skirt and connect the side seams on either side with a pin as well. And finally for the back, pin both bottom edges of the top so that they meet at that center back point of the skirt. So as you can see, we have the two back sides pinned in place to the center back. We have both of the side seams aligned and pinned down, and finally the center front points aligned as well. Then, between each of the 4 pins, use your fingers to evenly distribute the gathers, pinning along the edge as you go. Then, once that is all pinned down, go to your sewing machine and sew all the way around the circumference of the skirt, securing all of the gathered edges within your seam allowance. Now we are going to repeat that same process on the bottom tier. So start by sewing a straight stitch with a wide stitch length all the way around the top edge. Then tie a knot on one end, and using the thread on the other end, you're going to gather the fabric. So you will want the top of our bottom tier to be the same circumference as the bottom of the top tier. which is what I am just measuring now. It sounds confusing, but hopefully you can just see what I'm doing. So my bottom tier was still a little bit too large to be attached to the top tier, so I had to continue gathering to shorten the length until it was equal with the length of the bottom tier. Then you can knot the two ends together and cut off any excess thread. We are also going to repeat that process of evening out the gathers and marking a pin on all 4 quarters of the dress, so one at each side seam, one for the center front, and another for the center back. So make sure your bottom tier is still right sides facing inwards, and then grab the dress itself with the right sides out. Now we are going to match up the center front points of both the bottom tier and the bottom of the dress and place a pin, and then repeat that on either side and on the back as well. And as you can see for the center back point, we are essentially placing the entire dress inside that bottom tier, so it's kind of looping around the entire edge. Then again, use your fingers to arrange the gathers evenly between all 4 points we just marked, pinning as you go. And then we're going to sew all the way around the edge to secure the gathers in place, securing the bottom tier to the top. I also decided to do a few rows of zigzag stitching around the inside edges just to prevent any fraying. Then I'm going to press that bottom seam upwards towards the dress, and I'm going to press this top seam downwards so that when you wear the dress, you don't have the edge poking up through the back. So press that down, even though it feels counterintuitive to the way the fabric wants to flow. So we are almost done with our dress. We just need to finish up the bottom hem. So around the bottom edge, fold up the dress by around 1/4 inch again and press, and then fold that up over itself around 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch and press all the way around, as you can see here. Then you can sew a straight line all the way around the inside edge of that fold, trying to sew as straight as possible to achieve a clean finish. So it should look something like this when you are done. Then you can turn your dress right sides out and we are finished. So here is what the final dress looks like on me. I think it's actually just the right length. I was worried it would be a little bit too short, but I really like it, and I'm very happy with the color I chose as well. I love dresses like this. They are so simple, yet also have the fun elements with the puff sleeves or the ties up the back. I think it'll be really easy to dress up with some jewelry and like a low bun or something, or just wear it casually as like an everyday dress or to the beach in the summer. If you have any questions as well, please feel free to comment down below and I will do my best to answer. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.